Kange Kaneene. She is the vice president of SAP.io, Foundries North and Latin America. And SAP has a no equity ask external startup accelerator. The theme from her career has been her passion for diversity and creating equally distributed access to opportunity. She's an angel investor with Pipeline Angels Group, which is a group of female investors who invest in female founders. She's also a mentor for entrepreneurs as a volunteer for Defy Ventures. It's a nonprofit that invests in founders who are currently or formerly incarcerated. Welcome, Kange. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
All right, we're going to start with your path and particularly your upbringing. How did you get to where you are?
I grew up in East Lansing, Michigan, in the Midwest of the US, from two parents that are immigrants from Uganda, which is a country in East Africa. I have two siblings. I'm middle. We're all equally distance apart. My brother is 2 years older. My sister is 2 years younger. So we grew up in a home with a lot of love. Our parents exposed us to many things. We grew up in a college town. East Lansing, Michigan is where Michigan State University is. And so because of that, it's infused with a lot of different external parties that come in, and of course, a lot of diversity in terms of the students. So we were in things like figure skating and gymnastics and played instruments and played soccer and danced and did all these different things. And our parents also really exposed us to different career paths. So if I said I wanted to be a lawyer, the next day I would be at a class at the law school, just sitting in the back as a 10-year-old. One thing that was interesting growing up is we grew up in a neighborhood that was basically all Caucasian. I actually didn't have a close Black friend until I was 18 years old. And so I grew up, I always had, all my siblings, we always had a lot of friends and felt like we fit in. But then in hindsight, when you look back, I realized it probably were a lot of situations where I wasn't as accepted as I thought. What made me more confident and comfortable is I've always looked up to my brother. And he was an athlete growing up and he played football. And so in middle school, I told my mom, okay, well, I want to play football. I want to be on the tackle football team. My brother, the summer before, every day he'd take me out to the front yard. He would show me the proper tackling techniques and explain to me how the plays work and got me all ready. And so the first day of the summer training program, at the end of the summer, I went, and obviously the only girl, obviously the only Black person in seventh grade. But at that time, when you're in middle school, the girls are either the same or bigger than the guys. So from a size perspective, it was okay. And I walked in and my mom dropped me off and she waited in the car because I think she thought I'm just gonna, turn around. So she just waited. And the minute I got out of the car, I was so scared because I realized, like, what am I doing? And I was a little bit late. So the coach was standing and all the other players were sitting around him or on a knee, like, so they were below him looking up. And so there was no room for me in the circle. And so I walk up and this guy, I'll never forget, his name's Larry, moved to the side and said, here, you can sit here. And I was like, okay, that made me feel good. And so then I mustered the courage to stay. And it was one of the best decisions I've made. I ended up playing for 2 years. I was captain. I started. At high school, my mom drew the line and was like, okay, you have to quit. It really was the beginning of me trying to find my voice and to show that at least at that stage of my life, I was an athlete that was on par, in some cases even better than some of the other boys on the team.
I love that story so much, Kange, because not only were you the only person of color, Black person, you're a woman. I mean, talk about the only and defying stereotypes.
Right.
It's incredible. And luckily for you to have a star football brother to show you the ropes.
My family has been supportive always. I remember in high school, I was really into AOL Instant Messenger, and so I would come home at night and just talk to my friends till in the wee hours. And so my dad would always see me on the computer. And so I think he thought I was doing something productive on the computer, but of course I was just chatting. So when it came time to go to college, I did not know what I wanted to major. And so he said, well, what about computer science? You love those computers. And I was like, I didn't know what computer science was at all. I'd never heard of it. I only knew, lawyer or doctor. And so I said, sure, I'll try. What I liked about my first computer science 101 class is, at least back then, you would literally start with a black screen and then type something and then end up in a program. So I liked that you could create something from nothing. So the first class was like nothing I'd ever done. So I said, okay, I'll do the next class. And it was very, very challenging. I mean, it was not easy for me. You take a lot of math. After my first year when you have to think about declaring your major, my advisor told me, he said, I don't think this is a good fit for you. I don't think you should do it. And that really kind of pissed me off. And so I think that also fueled the reason why I stayed. But no, I had a lot of sleepless nights and I used to cry because I would just be so frustrated that it just was really challenging for me. But I ended up doing it, and me and two other women started an organization at University of Michigan called Geeks, which stands for Girls in Economic or Girls in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, because not surprisingly, there weren't that many girls. And it was great. We got some really good sponsors from like Microsoft and Goldman Sachs. And now that organization has expanded to about 5 different different universities. And it's a whole legacy that we're so proud that we started. And again, not very many women of people or people of color in general. In college, you have the concept of corporate presentations where a company will come present the open jobs. What was good about those is they always had free food. One time, this company came and they were having Panera bread. It just seemed like a dream. So I went, and when I got there, it was for the company called Bain Consulting, which is a management consulting firm. And at the time, I had never heard of consulting before, but the guy really sold it. He talked about opportunities to travel, exposure to different industries, dynamic projects. It felt like it just really fit my personality. So I thought, okay, so maybe I should do consulting. But because computer science was so hard for me, I was nervous about completely just throwing that all away. So I did a compromise and did tech consulting.
Being in situations where you are sometimes the only. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, these challenges that you can't do it,
Mhm.
does that continue in your career?
I mean, I've had challenges my whole life with being the only. I guess I'm a gluten for punishment, but everything I've decided to do, football, technology, all those things do not have women. And just in general, as a minority, you're always the minority. Every time I walk into a room, I'm completely aware of how many people look like me. I'm aware of it. It doesn't mean that it makes me feel like I'm less than. I think it actually gets harder the more experienced I am, because the further you go up, the less there are of us. And so you would think it gets easier, but it's actually the opposite. People tell me that I look young, I'm short, and I'm also a woman, whatever. So it's just people are always trying to understand. So what are you doing here? Or I feel like I always have to explain my resume, because if I don't, they assume that there's another reason I'm there. Someone tried to give me a break or for affirmative action or anything else. And it can't just be because I'm here because I deserve to be. I also see in terms of compensation and opportunities, it's just everywhere.
Kange, can you share with me when you decided to go into this world of investment into companies?
About 5 years ago at SAP, which is where I work now, I started a role in business development, which means I was supposed to find external partnerships for SAP to work with. And the executive I was working for really wanted to do an acquisition. So he wanted SAP to buy another company. And so he asked me to do what's called a market scan, which means go out and see who we should buy. And it was exciting for me because it was the first time I'd ever really worked externally like that. Before that, all my roles were more internal. And from that, I started to work with companies that were smaller than SAP, more agile, innovative, excited, in a way, just very different from SAP. And so I thought, okay, how can I do this as my full-time job, working with these types of companies? So I thought, I think that's what venture capitalists do. But then, of course, I thought, well, I don't know if I have the proper background, and also I don't know how one gets into venture capital. So I started to just be as active as I could in the New York entrepreneurship ecosystem. So I started going to like demo days, pitch competitions, and my objective there was to see how investors interact with startups, the kind of questions they're asking them, and also what are startups innovating on. I didn't even know if I understood like what the future was for companies, because I wanted to see if it was glamorous to me or if it was actually something I would enjoy. And then I also started telling everybody that would listen that I want to do VC, because I thought maybe one day someone will just call me. So I just was networking like crazy. One thing that I realized by doing that is, first of all, a lot of the ideas were very similar, like cryptocurrency, fintech, and then also the people at these events. And I think from SAP, I was able to coerce people to let me join these events. So they were sort of like marquee events. And a lot of the people were men, and most of them were Caucasian or Asian. And I thought, okay, I have a very diverse group of friends that are doing cool things. And also there must be more to innovate on than crypto and fintech. Doing more research, I understood now that there this kind of what they call overlooked founders. And a lot of demographics just have a really hard time getting access to capital for a number of reasons. And that to me was something that I thought was such a shame. And so I developed a passion for just access to opportunity, but more specifically access to capital. And I thought, what can I do as an individual to contribute to that? So that's why I started externally to do some things like angel investing, which means investing as an individual into companies. And I did that with Pipeline Angels that helps women. I also, the formerly incarcerated opportunity, I also scout for VC. So all these ways to try to bring money to the people that I think deserve it the most. In parallel, SAP started a group in 2016 called SAP.io that was a fund, a corporate fund, and accelerator. It just so happened that the executive that started that was my former boss from my first role at SAP. And again, because I told everybody I wanted to do VC, he knew that was something I wanted to do. But he also, I don't think necessarily thought I was someone that had the right background for it, which to his point was probably true at the time. So he said, why don't you just, be a friend of our group? You can mentor some of the startups. You can, join some of our selection committees. He also just recently hired the head of North America. Her name was Vanessa. We became friendly. Actually, sometimes we'd go to events together and I would actually represent SAP.io, which is funny because I didn't work for them, partly because they were like investing in like people of color and they needed someone to go. SAP doesn't have many people of color. And so then it was just a dream. In April 2021, Vanessa, the head of North America, called me and said, I wanted to let you know that I'm leaving to start my own venture. I think you should replace me. I couldn't believe it. And so that's how I got the role I have now. It's been such a pleasure. And our organization focuses on what we call no boundaries. So we focus on companies that are led or managed by people of color and women. And so it's a dream job for me.
I love the story and I want to actually map it out because there are some themes here, Kange, that you took initiative and you said, listen, here's what I want to do. Second, you verbalized it to as many people as possible. Third, you showed up to different events and tried to learn as much as you could by being there, talking to people. And then fourth, you positioned yourself in a company, even though that wasn't your job, to be ready for the opportunity. So she didn't just call you out of the blue. You're super deliberate. And those wouldn't have happened had you not been so mindful. So I love those strategies. How did you learn those strategies?
I learned early on that you have to work for things and they don't necessarily fall in your lap. And so I'm someone that is in a way fairly risk averse and not, I need to kind of like have a plan. And so it helps me to know where I'm going to go and then work backwards. When I was working my first job out of college, I met this guy that just gave me some really good advice because I was thinking about grad school, but I didn't know if I wanted to do it. And he said, and I also didn't know how I would make myself attractive to go to like a top business school. He said, my advice is open an application for a school that you think you want to go to and see if you can fill it out. Try to complete it. I'd only worked for 1 year. So I opened Haas Berkeley and literally I couldn't fill out anything besides like my name because it asked questions like, have you changed the corporation that you work for and all these things. And it helped me because then I said, all right, I'm going to do things intentionally so that I can have something to say on the application. And I think that has kind of been a fuel my rest of my career, which is let's look at the people that are where I want to be and how do they get there? And I know everybody has their own path, but because my parents are immigrants too, we don't have like an embed network that can help us with things. And so we have to create our own networks. And so that's how I've tried to survive.
It's a great strategy. I also wanted to highlight this idea you shared earlier, Kange, that when you're in rooms, that people question you. And so I'm curious, that continues to be a theme. How do you navigate that?
Sometimes it throws me off. For example, people have said, wow, you're the head of SAPIO North America. How did you get that job? The old me would have said, oh, like what I told you, da, 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 da. But then I got Coach Lucy to just say, I was recruited, right? And it's just like, I am here because they wanted me here. I try my best to keep a smile on and not, not start to get aggressive or anything. This is new in the last year where I actually feel like I've come into my own and I'm very comfortable in the role I'm in. I do a lot of external speaking and I feel like I'm justifiably like who I am. There are other times in my career where I wouldn't have been as comfortable saying I was recruited, even if that was the case, because I think, okay, some of it was luck. But now I don't worry about that anymore. I think that my path is exactly how it's supposed to be, and I'm proud of where I am.
Turning 40, Kange, is an empowering
That's
age.
true.
And yet it's 40, right? Like why are we having to talk about that at 40 after an
I
amazing
know.
career? Why couldn't it have been right off the bat coming out of a great school like Michigan?
Yeah.
So let's talk about this, because there's myth of can't expose myself because they're going to find cracks. They don't want me to win. So let's talk about
Right.
these different myths.
In a lot of cases, it was not a myth. I mean, I was right that people didn't want me to win, right? Um, I have examples of people proactively trying to do things to bring me down. I think what has been the only way I know how to navigate things in personal and professional life is just to focus on creating and maintaining relationships. That's all I can do. So there's been situations where I'm engaging with someone who literally I know for a fact has never had a conversation with a Black person before. So this is a lot of things to have to bring into the table, right? I'm representing billions of people. I'm also representing whatever you think I am and all these things. So in that case, I just try to think, okay, what's at least one thing I can try to connect on? Did their kids like music? Start with that and they use it as a wedge so that I'm like, at least I want to be able to say, Kange's cool. Like, I like her as a person, right? And I think when people like you, then things are just easier, right? It's harder to consider me your enemy if you actually think that I'm a fun person to be around. So that's kind of been what I've tried to do to debunk the thing. And I'm like, okay, if I can just create these small advocates along the way so that maybe one day they'll all be talking, I won't be there. And the one person that I just had coffee with will be like, no, but I talked to her yesterday.
It's real. And when we don't have necessarily obvious ways of connection, what
Hmm.
can we connect on so that we can be seen as people, humans
Right.
with
Yeah,
like
exactly.
insides too? Fairly
Right.
powerful. Tell me another myth that you might have had growing up or just in your career. Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of times where I was passed up for things. And actually, when I think about my friends from Stern, I'm considerably behind
Talk more
them in
about that.
terms of, well, one, the generational thing, right? So I always felt like at Stern, where I went to business school, I felt like that was sort of an equalizer. We all came from where we came from. We all got into the same school. For the most part, we left making around the same salary. So I thought, all right, so now whatever we've been through, we're sort of again on the same page. 5 years out, there are people that were buying their second home, angel investing early, doing all these things. I'm thinking like, what happened, right? And you realize, okay, one, generational wealth is a real thing, right? When your parents or family can give you your down payment on your home, they can be your nanny, all these different things help. Second, the connections that you have to get to situations faster. Like, no one is calling me then to say, do you want to sit on this board? Second, just the fact that there's data to prove that women and people of color just get paid less, right? But the salary that you're offered initially and then your ability to negotiate thereafter is not as, you don't have as much leverage. When you have friends that you're comfortable with and you're talking about compensation, it's a shock. I mean, I have friends making like $100,000 more than me with similar roles. It's crazy. Some of it's my fault because I haven't, until recently, I haven't been successful and feeling comfortable negotiating because I'm always worried that they're going to just say.
I just appreciate you so much, Kange, for sharing, because there is generational wealth and generational access, not just to money, but people. When we think about even entrepreneurship and taking risk, people
Right.
can take risk. White people, white males often can take risks because there's a cushion that
Right.
others, people of color, might not have. And so there's
Mhm.
reasons. It's not just like pure talent. And the salary one, I appreciate also, Kange, that you share it, because often we're like, we don't want to share, it's not,
Right.
it's private information. And in
Mhm.
addition, to ask for more money, like, who are you to ask? You're lucky you have this
Exactly.
job and you're greedy.
Right.
Especially, I come from
Right.
nonprofit. It's like, well, are you about the children or not? I'm like, I
Yeah.
am. Also, I want to be compensated. So
Right.
it's this double tension. Who could have told us? Never
Right.
accept the first salary. I'm curious what other, I'll call them secrets of success, or just things that you wish you had known earlier.
What's true about the relationships is I think I've always been naive, which is if I feel like I do have a relationship with someone, then they have my best interests at heart. And I think it's definitely, you need to be vulnerable to be honest. but you also need to have your eyes open and be aware, because there's been times in the work setting where I feel like I've had my back stabbed when I look back and I thought that was so obvious. I should have known that was going to happen, but I just didn't think. I'm like, this is a person I consider my friend, a work friend, and you know, and I just don't think that way about people. But again, it doesn't mean you need to have a negative attitude, but just have eyes open and understand that people have different motivations for being where they are. And again, as you go up in an organization, it's of course competitive. And so that brings out different things in people.
What does it look like to build relationships? Because that is a key part of moving up. And also, it's more fun, it's more fulfilling. And then, second, how do you make sure you protect yourself?
In business school and other organizations, they talk about networking, like network, meet all the people you can. And I realized early on that there's a wrong and right way to network, in my opinion, right? So there's a networking where you find someone who you look up to maybe, and you say, hey, let's get coffee every month. And it's, in some cases, it's not organic. And if you don't have the chemistry, it's just, and especially with people that are busy, it's hard to really create something positive out of that in some cases. But what I realized, at least in a work setting, is I try to network by getting to know people by actually doing work. So, for example, when I have a job and if my boss has asked me like, what kind of projects do you want to work on? I try my best to align myself with projects that are cross-functional. So I have to do work with marketing. I have to do work with finance. So that way I'm going to know them, but they're actually seeing the work that I can do and the contributions that I can make. That way, when I want to move around in the organization, I have people that can actually say, not only do I like her, but I've actually seen her in that meeting and she killed it or whatever. That's what I call like intentional networking, where it's still organic, but they have more to talk about than just the personality, especially when you're a non-credible demographic. They need to have these actual facts. And so I think that's been something that's been powerful.
And adding to that, what does it look like to be so deliberate in getting relationships, but then make sure that you're protecting yourself? What do you do for that?
I don't have it all figured out yet, but one is I try to look at patterns, like because sometimes people will feel comfortable confiding in you about things, right? And so if they're confiding you about something and you think that's kind of a messed up situation, the old me would have been like, yeah, I hear she did that to that person, but because we have a relationship, they wouldn't do it to me. No, probably it's like dating, right? You should look at these trends. Also, try to understand how people are motivated. So, for example, like, if I'm really good friends with someone's boss who's not my boss, think about, is that going to be a threat to the other person? Like, and how are you navigating that? Can I bring them into conversations I'm having? Or I just try to preempt things, but again, I haven't figured it out. But just understanding like why someone, like what do you think the person needs to move up? And how are you in that equation, right? Are you in the way? Are you going to be an advocate? Or do they see you as a threat?
Pastor T.D. Jakes has these stratifications of people. There's your confidants. Those are the people who, in the worst of times, they're going to be there for you. They're your comrades, people who are with you as long as they're going to get something out of it. And then there are the just people who pass through and they're like a plumber. It's like a one-time interaction. Right. And to actually stratify those first two, to say, actually, you're my person versus we're here, as long as it makes sense. And I'm going to make sure that I'm not surprised if there's something that happens where you have to make a decision that's for you, not about me, then that's what that is. Right. It's really great. Okay, we're going to go into the personal now, Kange, and we're turning 40. So happy birthday, early birthday.
Thank you.
And I'm curious, how do you think about family, if you want a family, your career, even your personal life? Has there been a sacrifice on that end?
Growing up, I never really had a strong desire to have kids. Not because I don't like kids. I get along well with kids. My parents were good parents, but my mom in particular basically canceled her life for us. She was just an amazing mom. She was always there. She just was an amazing mom. And that's the kind of mom that I would want to be. And so I think about that and I'm like, with the life I have now, there is no way I could be a mom like she was, because, I just can't. I travel a lot, I work a lot. If I do have kids, I've decided that I definitely want to adopt, one, because there's so many kids that need to be adopted, but also because I don't have this organic desire to be a natural mom. That kind of helps, because then I don't have this like internal clock ticking. I'm clear that I definitely want a partner, a companion, and also just a partner, but I don't want to just get married. And so unfortunately, I haven't met anybody yet. And it could be because I've been focused on career. I'm also seeing people getting divorced now as well, and how messy that is, right? So I hope that won't happen in my situation. I really do want someone who's a partner, and sometimes that's not something that the people I've met are looking for, right? They really want to be seen as the person that's the provider and the head of the household. And I think that probably is not compatible with me.
Your clarity on who you want to be as a mom. I don't need to be pregnant. I can adopt. And I'm also not going to settle for just anyone. That's beautiful. What advice would you give a woman in their career trying to make it to a senior position?
I'd say it's okay to have a meandering path. We didn't talk as much about path at SAP, but it's been just one job from another, that if you looked at it on paper, you probably would wonder, how did it happen? But be okay with trusting the people that are looking at you and saying, this is a role that I think you'd be good at. Because sometimes there were times where people would say, hey, I think you should join my team. And I first thought, really? I don't know. But, but then sometimes people see things in you that you don't see in yourself. And so it's okay to try. It's okay to fail a little bit, but just make sure that you're advocating for yourself and saying, okay, I'll move to that role, but it needs to be a promotion, but I need to get that raise. Especially when I didn't apply for this job. Like, you want me, so then how much do you want me, to make sure that people understand what your worth is?
With that, let's go to lightning round questions.
Okay.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Vanilla.
Cooking or takeout?
Cooking.
Climb a mountain or jump from a plane?
Climb a mountain.
Have you ever worn socks with sandals?
No, faux pas.
How would you rate your karaoke skills on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being Mariah Carey?
Funny, because Mariah Carey, Always My Baby, is my go-to karaoke song. And I don't have a good voice, but I have a really good presentation. So I get the crowd going. So I think, 8, but again, not because of the voice.
What's a recent book you read?
I'm reading a book right now that's like just a fun book. It's Not All Diamonds and Rosé, the book about the Real Housewives.
What's a favorite way to practice self-care?
Working out.
What's a really good professional development you've done?
I was talking earlier about things that I've realized in the past year. My boss was gracious enough to sponsor me to get executive coach. It's been really helpful. It helps in terms of the way I articulate my story. She gave me a stylist. I think I have good style, but she told me there's situations where, like, you're sitting versus standing versus still photo versus film, and those things matter.
And what's your definition of a boss mama?
Someone knows how to get after what she wants.
What advice would you give your younger self?
YOLO, just do it. I think you can really talk yourself out of a lot of things. Life is short, and you think that everything is how it's going to be, and then until it's not. So just take advantage of every day.
And then where can we find you? Like LinkedIn or anywhere else?
Yeah, I'm super approachable. So feel free. You can email me directly, kange.kaneene@sap.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't know anyone in the world that has my name. So any social media that you want to follow me on, it's just my first and last name. There's no numbers, there's no nothing. So I am on Twitter, but I don't really tweet. So if you tweet at me, I probably won't know. But LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, email, you can find me.
Do you have a final ask, recommendation, or any parting thoughts for the audience?
I always tell people the cure to most things is perspective. So do what you can to gain more perspective, travel more, talk to more people, try new things. You'll be more interesting, and you will also think other people are more interesting.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.